Tonight, somewhere over the Pacific, a plane will cross in 4 hours what once took a human being 3 weeks to survive. No engine, no satellite, no screen glowing with a blue dot that says you are here, just a canoe, a handful of strangers, and the sky. And yet they made it, again and again, across the largest ocean on Earth, without a single piece of the technology you'd assume was required to not die trying. The real answer is far stranger than they got lucky. Because what ancient Pacific voyagers were doing wasn't guessing. It was a full sensory system built over thousands of years that turned the human body itself into a compass. Start with the ocean under the canoe. Not the waves you see, the waves you feel. Long, low swells roll across the Pacific for thousands of miles, generated by distant, steady winds. They don't stop at an island. They bend around it, refract off it, and collide with themselves on the far side, creating a faint, crossed pattern in the water. A trained navigator could lie in the bottom of the hull and feel that pattern through the wood, not see it, feel it. Anthropologist Ben Finney spent decades studying this. In the 1970s, he helped build a replica voyaging canoe called the Hokule'a, specifically to test whether ancestral Pacific navigation actually worked, or whether it was myth dressed up as history. It worked. The canoe sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti, using nothing but the methods ancient navigators had passed down. No instruments, just a person reading the ocean like a second skin. How do you memorize an entire ocean? You don't memorize the ocean, you memorize the sky. Pacific navigators used something called a star compass, not a device, a mental map built from watching where specific stars rise and set on the horizon night after night for years until the pattern became instinct. Each star has its own rising point. As one sets, another rises to take its place, like a relay race across the night. A navigator didn't need every star. They needed the ones that mattered, and they needed to know that order the way you know the alphabet. Researcher David Lewis, a physician and sailor, spent years living among Pacific Islanders in the 1960s, learning these techniques directly from the last generation of master navigators who still used them. He wrote that the sky itself functioned as a slowly rotating clock face, and the navigator's job was simply to keep reading the correct hour. But a clock only helps if you know where you started. Before the canoe ever left shore, a navigator would fix a mental image of the home island's position relative to the rising sun, and hold that image for the entire voyage. Every course correction, every drift, every shift in wind was measured against that single starting point, carried entirely in memory, sometimes for weeks at a time. Think about what that actually requires. Not a glance at a map. A mind that never lets go of home, even while surrounded by nothing but water in every direction. What happens when clouds hide the stars for days? This is where it stops sounding like navigation and starts sounding like something closer to instinct. Because the body doesn't stop tracking direction just because the eyes lose the stars. A skilled wayfinder could sense the dominant swell direction through the hull, hold that feeling in memory, and mentally correct the canoe's heading for hours, sometimes days, purely by feel. Some navigators reportedly lay across the hull to sense the swell pattern directly through their own weight. There's a term for this kind of tracking. Researchers call it dead reckoning, the practice of continuously estimating your current position using only your speed, your direction, and how much time has passed since your last known point. Modern ships still use a version of it as a backup when electronics fail. Ancient Pacific navigators ran the entire calculation in their heads, correcting it every few minutes for the length of an entire ocean crossing. Your ancestors didn't out-navigate the ocean with tools. They out-navigated it with attention. And it wasn't just the swells doing the talking. Wind direction shifted subtly by time of day, warming and cooling air over open water, in patterns a trained navigator could feel against the side of their face without ever looking up. Combine that with the swell reading through the hull, and a navigator effectively had two independent systems confirming the same heading, each one a backup for the other in case conditions changed. This redundancy mattered because the ocean rarely cooperates for an Then there was land, long before it was visible. Certain seabirds fly out to feed each morning and return to their nesting island each evening, rarely straying more than 100 miles offshore. A navigator who spotted the right species, flying the right direction, at the right time of day, had just found an island without seeing it. Clouds gave clues too. A stationary patch of cloud on an otherwise clear horizon often meant land beneath it, since islands heat the air above them and change how clouds form. Even the color reflected on the underside of clouds could shift subtly over a lagoon, a pale green tint hinting at shallow water and reef long before any shoreline appeared. And the water changed too. Wave patterns near an island distort in specific, learnable ways, sometimes detectable from 10 or even 20 miles out, long before any coastline breaks the horizon. This is the part that should stop you. None of this was written down. Not in the way you think of writing. There were chants. There were songs that encoded star paths and swell directions into rhythm and repetition, so a fact you needed to survive became a fact you couldn't forget. The Pacific Islands were mapped not on paper, but in memory, passed from a master navigator to a chosen student over years of direct, physical training at sea. Training could begin as early as childhood. A young apprentice might spend years memorizing star paths on land before ever being trusted with a canoe full of lives depending on his judgment. One mistake, one missed star, one misjudged swell could mean missing an island entirely and running out of water somewhere in open ocean. One of the last master navigators trained this way was a man named Hokule'a from the tiny island of Satawal in Micronesia. He learned wayfinding from his grandfather starting as a young child, using the sand, shells, and stars as his only instruments. In 1976, Piailug guided the Hokule'a from Hawaii to Tahiti, using nothing but the knowledge in his own mind, becoming the bridge between a nearly lost tradition and the modern world that had almost forgotten it was real. Archaeologist Patrick Kirch later argued that voyages like this weren't rare accidents of drift, but deliberate, repeated expeditions, carried out by people who fully expected to arrive somewhere specific, and who often turned around and sailed home again, using the very same skills in reverse. Why does any of this matter to you scrolling through a map app that already knows exactly where you are? Because somewhere underneath the GPS, the same instincts are still there. You still glance at the sky before deciding whether to bring a jacket. You still feel faintly when a storm is coming before the app confirms it. You still turn toward a familiar smell of rain, or salt, or smoke, and know something about your surroundings before you've consciously thought about it. Even now, if you walk into a room you've lived in for years, you could probably find the light switch in complete darkness without thinking, using nothing but memory built through repetition. That's the same mechanism, just aimed at a smaller world. For most of human history, paying that kind of attention wasn't a hobby, it was survival. The people who noticed the smallest shift in a wave, the tiniest cloud in the wrong place, the faint change in a bird's flight path, were the ones who found land, and the ones who lived long enough to teach someone else. You come from those people. Somewhere over the Pacific tonight, a plane will cross in 4 hours what once took 3 weeks and an entire body trained to listen to the ocean. But the real journey was never about the distance. It was about a mind that learned to read a world with no lines on it at all.